Branko, you can start and kind of give us give us your perspective for a few minutes, and then we'll go to Professor Wolff.
Sure. Well, what might surprise people is that actually I share quite a lot of the same concerns that Professor Wolff has, and there are a lot of people that are opposed or kind of not super into the idea of vaccine mandates have. I think bodily autonomy is a fundamental and important principle. If you go and look at my work over the years, you'll find many pieces I've written about civil liberties, free speech, and the like. I'm a very, let's say, a jealous guardian of my civil liberties and other people's. I think it's vital, and of course, workers' rights are part of that too. However, I'm not an absolutist. For instance, when it comes to free speech, most of the time I would say the government should never, and neither should private corporations, censor people's speech. However, I also recognize that in certain fields, let's say the issue of money in politics, which is a speech issue, I do understand that there are pragmatic reasons to limit speech and to have the government kind of restrict speech. In this case, the amount of money that people should give to political campaigns and the like. And you might consider something like, say, food labeling, labeling where food comes from, or labeling certain things about the various products we buy in supermarkets. That by the courts has been treated as a speech issue. Can the government compel speech? Can it make people do speech that they wouldn't otherwise do? In that case, I also think that's completely fine, even if it theoretically violates some of these things. On the issue of vaccine mandates, my reasoning is a little bit different. For one, I look at the exceptional nature of this particular event. We're looking at a once in a century crisis, emergency. The last time we had something this deadly, a virus this deadly, it was the influenza way back in whatever, 1918, 1920, and the years since. This is not something that happens every year. It doesn't even happen every decade. Second of all, we're talking about an event that, say, unlike terrorism, which was construed as an emergency event, even though if you look at the amount of people that actually died or were threatened by terrorism, it's very small. It's a very shocking, visceral thing, but on the whole does not actually threaten a lot of people. COVID is very different. COVID has killed, at this point, I think 6 million people, over 6 million people worldwide, which is probably an undercount because there's countries like India that haven't properly, actually fed the real number of people who have died, at least suspected. You've also got the fact that in the US, I think now it's at 984,000 people. Nearly 1 million people have died just in the course of 2 years from this pandemic. At the moment, I think something like I've seen 500, I've seen 600 people are dying a day. This pandemic's not over. And its height, I mean, there was more than a September 11's worth of victims who were dying every single day. So this is unlike terrorism, it's a huge threat. And it's one that I think because of the uniquely threatening nature of it, not just in the bodies that it leaves behind it, but in the amount of disruption to people's lives, to the economy, which obviously has, all of those have knock-on effects on people suffering. I think there's a case to make an exception for some of these concerns that I have about civil liberties and even, bodily autonomy. But we have to be smart about how we go about doing that. I think in the piece I wrote, originally I had pushed for a mandate that was more along the lines of if you travel by plane, if you go into an airport, you should have a vaccine passport. That's something that the federal government can easily mandate through an order. I was actually surprised that the Biden administration went further. But ultimately, the way they went about it was not as extreme as, say, the vaccine mandates of the 1800s and the early 1900s, where people, went door to door and forced people to get vaccinated, which I think is a horrible idea. They said, look, you either have to get tested once a week or you get the vaccine, which I think is a good way, a good pragmatic way to go about this without sort of forcing people to get vaccinated. I'm less enthusiastic about basically fining people thousands of dollars, say, if they don't get vaccines. I think that's not as an effective or a humane way to go about it. I guess I've been talking for a little while, so I haven't quite given you the full scope of my argument, but I think given all these concerns, I think there is an argument to implement a vaccine mandate. I think they have worked, and we can go into it a little later. And I think the case around, undermining workers' rights, certainly there's a case we made for that. But I think also it's not quite as clear cut. And it's actually, in some ways, unions have actually embraced it. It's not all unions, but some have, because it's allowed them to negotiate over other issues and giving them a little more power in the workplace. But we can get into that a little later. But for now, that's sort of my opening kind of argument, I guess, my opening statement.
Good. Thanks, Branko. Professor Wolff, you want to give us kind of a few minutes of your perspective?
Sure. I approach this, I guess, in a political way, because it seems to me that that's an appropriate a way in. It's not the only way, but a way into the topic. I am excited about and committed to getting working class people to act collectively to change the system. That's what my work is about. That's what I'm for. That's what I advocate. I think that there are people who are suddenly, perhaps provoked by the disease and the scariness of it, to be able to articulate in a pretty clear way that they either don't trust the government, or they don't trust pharmaceutical corporations, or the whole corporate sector. And when I see people getting together to do that, my gut feeling and my reflective conclusions are that we belong there. That is our audience. That is our constituency. And we ought to be in there encouraging and supporting that they do that. I am not surprised that there are right-wing people who pretty much see that opportunity as well, although obviously they want to take it in a different direction. But the presence of right-wing people with their agendas mixing in doesn't affect me at all. I expect that. If they initiate it, I'm going to be there. If I initiate it, I assume they'll show up one way or another, and then we're going to have to struggle as to who carries the day, who wins the argument, who takes all of this in what direction. I don't want the government to be trusted in its mandates, and I don't want pharmaceuticals to be trusted in their mandates. I think both of them have shown that they are not trustworthy, that they are not allies of what working people need. I'm trying to be polite, but they are fundamentally the enemy. And I'm finding it very, very disturbing that those of us on the left would find ourselves unnecessarily, it seems to me, in bed with the people who are rightly distrusted when it comes to what they have done and proven themselves willing and able to do. And I don't see, therefore, why we should give them that. If they want to, the government and the pharmaceuticals, sit down and make a case one way or another about what vaccines are and what they're good for and so on, I have no objection to having a serious conversation, not a mandate. I don't want the government to be in a position of telling us what to do. And I sure as hell don't want the pharmaceutical companies who operate, I'm an economist, so bear with me, who operate a monopoly in this society. The medical industrial complex generates a profitability that most other industries in American capitalism cannot equal. And they do that because they're ripping off this society and have been doing it for decades with the active collusion of the government, most of whose relevant leaders they have purchased. And therefore, I want to stimulate opposition. And I want to insist that anyone who functions the way they have lost long ago the authority in principle to mandate anything. And if they want to sit down and talk, with the working class, okay. But there are some conditions I would apply. Let me give you an example. In European countries, it is forbidden for pharmaceuticals to directly advertise to the public. They can't do that for the obvious reason that you don't want to intrude advertising, profit-driven, lopsided, dishonest advertising, because let's remember what advertising is. You're trying to get people to buy something, you tell them the good things, and you hide the rest of it, which is what advertisers do and are paid to do. You don't permit advertising. You do in this country. Therefore, you have long ago polluted the whole scientific discourse because the population cannot trust what the pharmaceuticals, with the collusion of the government, are saying. That means unless you change these rules, unless you make science, and particularly medical science, something people can genuinely trust, and that would require big social changes that this country needs, and that we could explain to people as part of a struggle here, unless we do that, then mandates become simply giving another tool, a control tool, to people who don't deserve it, and pay the price of losing the interest, if you like, of those who are opposed, those who are wondering about this opposition, those who are thinking about it, provoked by one or the other side, from being open to the kind of discourse and communication that we need to build a left movement in this country, which is where I'm coming from. And so for me, I would insist, and I've done this already publicly, if you want the people to be vaccinated, sit down and work out a way of doing that allows people who don't want to have the opportunity to make the case for themselves and for others. I noticed there are plenty of examples. The flight attendants union in this country, led by a very progressive young woman, Sarah Nelson, they worked out a system with the airline. No mandate was involved. When the governor or the mayor of cities tells workers, you have to be vaccinated or we will take away your job, man, that's the capitalism that I find objectionable. Who in the world gives you the right to make such a threat against another human being? And finally, I mean, there are many more issues, but finally, I don't want to find myself in an alliance with liberals who don't care or know about the long struggles workers had to go through so that they weren't the victims of whatever mandate employers, public or private, felt they could impose on them. That's not going to be given up through some excuse about managing a disease. And my final point would be this, and I'm going to choose my example partly to be provocative, but because it's appropriate. Yes, we have 1 million people that have been killed in this society. It is a pathetic testimony to the incapacity of this culture, given its capitalist structure, to cope with this disease. We weren't prepared for it, even though we knew exactly what the problem in 1918 was. We know what viruses are. We've had recent viruses, MERS, SARS, all the rest of it. We know what we're in for. We know what the risks are, and yet we destroy hospitals and clinics and rural and all kinds of medical facilities in this country. That was a cost-saving activity because our politicians won't tax the wealthy and the corporations. We weren't prepared. Other societies, I'm going to pick China, they don't have this problem with the vaccination because they solved their COVID problem in a different way. We have 1 million people that died. That's a country with 4 times the population of ours, and they don't have 10,000 who died. There's no contest here. Before you go mandating something, why isn't there a proper conversation about the alternative ways one can approach this disease? This is a failure in this society, a big one, and that itself ought to be the focus of the agitation, not the discussion of the validity of more or less mandate, public or private mandate, etc.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron exclusive post games on Monday nights, all of the patron exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.